Lyra's small hands were sore from the chains that cut into her wrists. The cold metal linked her to the wall of the dark, damp chamber she had called home for as long as she could remember. Her greenish-blue skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and her golden eyes reflected years of pain, fear, and quiet determination. She had been captured as a young adult by the overlord of this distant planet, a tyrant who ruled his city with cruelty and fear. Lyra had been forced into labor, cooking, cleaning, and working in the vast, twisting corridors of the overlord's fortress-like palace. Every day was the same. A struggle to survive, a struggle to stay invisible, and a struggle to keep hope alive. Despite her captivity, Lyra had a sharp mind. She had watched her captors carefully, memorizing their routines, weaknesses, and habits. She knew which guards were lazy, which machines could be manipulated, and which doors were never locked properly. But knowledge alone was not enough. Every time she tried to plan an escape, fear whispered in her mind. One wrong move could cost her life. Still, deep inside, she carried a spark, the spark of freedom, of living her own life, not one dictated by chains. That morning, the usual alarm echoed through the halls of the fortress. Lyra stirred in her corner, pulling at her chains, testing their strength. She had learned that the metal that bound her was almost unbreakable with her strength alone. But her mind worked differently. She thought in steps, in possibilities, in patience. She knew one day she would find the chance to act, to change her fate. Outside the chamber, the palace was alive with activity. Guards patrolled the hallways, their mechanical boots echoing on the stone floors. Servants rushed by, carrying trays of food, cleaning the halls and attending to the whims of the overlord. Some of the workers were older than Lyra, their faces pale with exhaustion. Others were young, frightened, and broken like she had been once. Lyra watched them carefully, noting who could be trusted, who was too afraid to resist, and who might be ready to follow a brave leader. Someone like her. It was on this day that a human arrived. Captain Ethan Rains was unlike anyone Lyra had ever seen. He came from another world, one where humans lived with courage, curiosity, and a sense of fairness that seemed foreign here. Ethan was tall, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. His uniform marked him as an explorer, a traveler, someone not meant to be in this city of oppression. And yet here he was, walking among the aliens, observing quietly, making no sudden moves but carrying an energy that made even the guards pause. Lyra noticed him immediately. She had learned to spot anything unusual, anything that did not fit the cruel rhythm of her world. The human moved differently. He did not glare, he did not shout, and he did not fear. He simply watched. And that watching was dangerous. It could expose him, make him a target, or worse. Yet he was fearless, almost calm in a way that made her heart race. She wondered why a human would come to this place. Was he lost, curious? Or did he see what she had always hoped someone would see? The injustice, the suffering, the possibility for change. As the day passed, Ethan continued to explore the palace. Lyra observed him silently, hiding behind pillars, behind crates, and in shadows where no one would notice her. She was careful not to be seen, but she could not help being drawn to him. There was something in the way he moved, the way he paused to notice small details, that reminded her of a world beyond chains, a world she could almost touch in her imagination. That evening, when the sun dipped below the jagged horizon outside, Lyra's work brought her near the human. She was carrying a heavy tray of supplies to the kitchens when a guard bumped into her, nearly causing her to drop everything. In a flash, Ethan stepped forward, speaking in a calm, firm voice that the guard could not ignore. The guard backed off, grumbling, while Ethan's eyes met Lyra's for the first time. In that brief moment, a connection formed. Lyra felt something she had not felt in years: hope. Not just a wish for freedom, but the possibility that someone, a human, a stranger from another world, might understand, might help. Ethan did not speak to her directly, but his eyes said it all. They said, "I see you. You are not invisible. You are not alone." Over the next few days, Lyra watched him more closely. She noticed small acts of kindness. He made sure the younger workers were safe. He asked questions about the palace that seemed to uncover truths the overlord wanted hidden, and he avoided unnecessary conflict. He never boasted about his strength, never tried to dominate, but he carried a quiet power, a power of intelligence, courage, and empathy. Lyra began to communicate with him subtly. She dropped items near his path, left messages in hidden corners, and made gestures he could understand. Ethan responded in kind, smiling faintly when he realized she was trying to reach him. They began a careful, cautious friendship, built in whispers, in hidden notes, in understanding glances. They could not speak freely, and the guards would notice. But even this small connection gave Lyra a sense of hope she had never known. One night, as the city slept under the oppressive gaze of the Overlord's towers, Lyra lay on the cold floor of her chamber, chains digging into her wrists. She thought about the human who had appeared like a spark in the darkness. She imagined freedom, not just for herself, but for all those who suffered under the Overlord's rule. She imagined a day when she could walk without fear, when she could lead her people, when she could see the stars without metal bars between her and the sky. Ethan was planning something too. Lyra could sense it. He moved quietly, observing the palace, learning the routines, and thinking strategically. He was human, and humans were clever in ways her captors could never understand. She knew he could help her, but she also knew that trust was dangerous. She had been betrayed before, by those who promised freedom but brought only suffering. Yet something about Ethan was different. She believed cautiously that he was someone she could rely on. The first real moment of change came when Lyra dropped a small, carefully folded note near Ethan's work area. It simply read, "I can help you understand this place. You must be careful." She watched from the shadows as he read it. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in thought. He looked around as if considering the risk, then tucked the note into his pocket. That small gesture, so simple, was a promise that a new story was beginning. Lyra returned to her corner, heart pounding. She had made the first step. For years she had been silent, afraid, and alone. Now she had a companion, someone who could see her not as a servant but as a person with courage, intelligence, and hope. She knew the road ahead would be dangerous. The Overlord's guards were everywhere. His eyes were sharp and his punishments were cruel. But for the first time, Lyra felt something she had thought impossible: the possibility of change. Outside her chamber, the human moved with purpose. Ethan had noticed the small patterns, the subtle weaknesses in the palace, and he had begun to think about what could be done. He understood the risks. Any wrong move could mean death for him, for Lyra, or for the other captives. Yet he also understood something else: that humanity was not just about strength, but about courage, kindness, and the willingness to act when others would not. And so, in the quiet shadows of the oppressive palace, a small spark ignited. Chains still held Lyra's hands, and fear still lingered in her mind, but hope was no longer a dream. It was real. A human had come, and with him, the possibility of a life she had never dared to imagine. A life free from chains, full of courage, intelligence, and friendship. This night marked the beginning of a new journey. A journey where two unlikely allies, a human and an alien woman, would face danger, outsmart tyranny, and discover the power of hope, trust, and the unbreakable spirit of a being determined to be free. And in the quiet chamber, Lyra closed her eyes, feeling something she had not felt in a long time, a sense that tomorrow might finally bring change. The next morning, the palace buzzed with the usual chaos. Guards patrolled the halls, and the Overlord's workers rushed to complete endless chores. Lyra moved quietly through the corridors, her chains clinking softly with each step. She had learned to navigate the palace without drawing attention. Every shadow was her friend, every corner a place to hide if necessary. Her mind, however, was not on escape yet. It was on the human Ethan. That brief encounter the day before had changed something inside her. She no longer felt completely alone. The faint spark of trust he had inspired had grown into a cautious hope. But trust was dangerous. One mistake could expose them both. She had to be careful. Ethan, meanwhile, moved with quiet purpose. He had observed the patterns of the guards, the timing of their rounds, and the weaknesses of the palace doors. But most importantly, he had noticed Lyra, the alien woman who moved quietly, kept her head down, and yet whose eyes reflected intelligence, courage, and determination. He had seen her glance at him from the shadows, and he knew she was aware of his presence. That understanding alone made him careful. Any sudden move could endanger her. That morning, Lyra found an opportunity. One of the storage rooms had a small vent, partially hidden behind crates. It was narrow, just wide enough to slip a folded note through. Carefully, she wrote a message in her alien script, simple words that she knew Ethan could understand with the context he had already learned. "Meet me where the sun touches the highest tower. I know the paths." She watched from the shadows as Ethan received the note. He read it slowly, his eyes scanning the room to ensure no one noticed. Then with a small nod, he tucked it into his uniform. That single gesture, simple, quiet, almost invisible, gave Lyra a thrill of hope. He had accepted her message. He trusted her. The day passed slowly, with Lyra performing her assigned chores and Ethan continuing his observations. Every glance, every movement was careful, measured, like a dance where a single misstep could ruin everything. The guards were strict but predictable. Lyra had memorized their routines, and Ethan had noted the weak points in their patrols. Together, even without speaking openly, they were forming a plan. As the sun began to set, Lyra prepared to meet Ethan at the tower. She moved through narrow corridors, slipping past guards and avoiding the main walkways. Her chains weighed heavily on her, but she ignored the pain. Tonight, something important would begin. She reached the base of the tower, looking up at its height. The sun's last rays touched the top, casting a golden glow that reflected off the stone walls. She climbed carefully, using hidden ledges and narrow staircases known only to workers like her. At the top, Ethan was waiting. He had chosen a quiet spot, hidden from the patrols and the watchful eyes of the Overlord. When Lyra arrived, he gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that they were about to take a step together. "I know this place," Lyra said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I know the guards, the doors, the passages. I can help you move safely, but you must promise to follow my lead." "One mistake." Her voice trailed off, but the threat was clear. Ethan nodded. "I understand. I will follow your lead." His calm confidence reassured her. There was something different about him. Humans had a way of remaining composed under pressure. It was a quality she had not seen in anyone else here. For the next hour, they talked in whispers, planning small steps. Lyra shared what she knew about the palace: hidden passages, the guards' predictable patterns, and areas that were lightly monitored. Ethan offered ideas too: simple human technology and tools that could help them avoid detection, communicate secretly, or create diversions if needed. As they spoke, their understanding of each other grew. Lyra realized that Ethan was not just clever, he was compassionate. He asked about her life, her experiences, and the suffering she had endured. For the first time, someone truly listened to her story without judgment or dismissal, and Ethan realized that Lyra was extraordinary. Her mind was sharp, her courage unwavering, and her sense of strategy remarkable. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. Over the following days, their secret friendship deepened. Lyra would leave small messages for Ethan in hidden spots, notes that only he could find. She taught him the basics of her language, and he shared human words and ideas in return. They laughed quietly at the strange differences between their worlds, celebrated small victories, and encouraged each other to think bigger. But the palace was dangerous. Guards were everywhere, and one wrong step could mean punishment for both of them. Lyra moved cautiously, knowing every risk. Ethan, despite being from another world, adapted quickly. He learned to move silently, to observe without being seen, and to use his intelligence instead of relying on strength. Together, they began to test small actions, opening a locked door unnoticed, creating minor diversions, and helping other workers avoid punishment. Each small success built confidence and trust. One evening, as they met near a quiet corner of the palace, Ethan looked at Lyra seriously. "You've been planning this alone for so long. I want to help, but I need to know what you want most." Lyra's eyes glimmered in the dim light. She thought of her chains, her life under the Overlord, and the countless others who suffered in silence. "Freedom," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for all of us. The ones who live in fear, who obey because they have no choice. I want a chance for them to live with hope, to choose their own paths." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll do it together. I may be human, but I believe in your vision. We'll make it possible." That night, as the palace slept, they continued to plan. They mapped routes through the fortress, noted which guards were more likely to be distracted, and identified areas where the humans' tools could help. Every detail mattered. Every small risk had to be calculated. But more than the plans, more than the strategy, the bond between them grew. Trust had been forged in whispers, in glances, in shared understanding. And trust was a powerful thing. Days turned into a week, and their small acts of defiance began to ripple through the palace. Other workers noticed subtle changes. Tasks were completed more efficiently. Small mistakes by the guards were quietly exploited, and the air of oppression felt slightly lighter. Some workers began to whisper about a human and an alien working together, though none could see the full extent of their plan. Hope was spreading even in the darkest corners. Lyra felt a strength she had never known. She was no longer alone. She had a companion, someone who understood her world, someone who valued her courage and intelligence. And she realized that hope was not just a dream. It was something they could build step by step together. One evening, Ethan asked a question that made Lyra pause. What happens if we succeed? What kind of world do you imagine after the Overlord is gone? Lyra thought carefully. A world where no one is chained, where everyone can think, speak, and live freely. A world where strength comes from courage and intelligence, not fear. A world where humans and aliens can work together, learning from each other, helping each other. Ethan smiled. I like that world, and I want to help you build it. For the first time in years, Lyra felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Not a fragile, fleeting hope, but a solid, real possibility that life could change. The chains on her wrists were still heavy, but they no longer defined her. A spark had ignited, and with it the promise of freedom, friendship, and a future she could shape. As the sun set beyond the horizon, casting long shadows over the palace, Lyra and Ethan stood together quietly, sharing a moment of understanding. They were different from different worlds, but their goals aligned. And together, they were ready to face the dangers ahead, to challenge the tyranny that had ruled for so long, and to begin a journey that could change not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. And so in the quiet of the oppressive palace, two unlikely allies prepared for the first steps of a daring plan. The spark of friendship had grown into a small flame, one that could light the path toward freedom. The day had begun like any other, with the palace humming in the early morning light. Guards marched in their routine patterns. Servants hurried through the corridors, and the Overlord's eyes seemed to watch from every corner, even when he was far away. But for Lyra and Ethan, the day carried a quiet sense of purpose. Today, they would begin the first real steps of their plan, not just small acts of defiance, but a move toward freedom. Lyra had studied the palace for years, memorizing every hallway, every ventilation shaft, and every blind spot in the guards' patrol. Ethan had learned quickly, using his human logic and technology to enhance what Lyra already knew. Together, they were ready to test the possibilities of escape, even if the chains on Lyra's wrists still reminded her of the danger. They met in their usual hidden corner just before dawn. The pale light of the sun filtered through a cracked window, painting golden stripes across the cold stone floor. Lyra had brought a small folded map, simple sketches marking passages, weak doors, and lightly guarded areas. Ethan leaned over it, studying each mark carefully. Good, he said softly. If we follow this, we can move without being seen. The guards' rotations are predictable, and we can use the side corridors to avoid the main checkpoints. Lyra nodded. But we must move quickly. If we hesitate, if anyone notices anything unusual, the plan could fail. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with determination. She had imagined this moment for years. Now it was real. The first part of the plan was simple yet dangerous. They needed to free two other workers who had shown signs of courage and intelligence. Hidden among the palace's laborers, Lyra had observed them carefully. One was a young alien named Sela, whose hands were nimble and quick. The other was an older alien named Toryn, strong but cautious. Both had endured the Overlord's cruelty silently, but Lyra believed they would rise to the challenge if given a chance. Ethan watched as Lyra moved toward the first target. Her chains rattled softly, but she ignored the sound, focusing on timing each step perfectly. The guards passed near the storage room, but their attention was elsewhere. Lyra slipped inside, finding Sela crouched over a pile of cleaning tools. "You're coming with me," Lyra whispered, showing the small map. "We can escape. There's a human helping me, and we have a plan. Trust me." Sela hesitated, fear in her wide eyes. "And if we are caught?" Lyra's voice was steady. "Then we try again. But if we do nothing, nothing will change." After a moment, Sela nodded, her fear giving way to hope. "I will follow you," she said. Ethan and Lyra led Sela through the narrow corridors, avoiding the guards with careful timing. Their small movements were precise, almost invisible. Every door opened silently. Every corner was taken with caution, and every risk calculated. For the first time in Sela's life, she felt a glimmer of freedom. The second target, Toryn, was more challenging. His work area was heavily guarded, and the corridors were wider, leaving fewer places to hide. Lyra and Ethan watched him from a distance, noting the guards' movements. Then, as a patrol approached, Ethan created a small distraction, a light signal that triggered an alarm in the far corner of the palace. The guards rushed toward it, leaving Torrin's section lightly defended. Lyra moved quickly, slipping into the workroom and whispering to Torrin. "We are leaving. Trust me and you can be free." Torrin grunted, doubt and hope warring in his expression, but he saw the determination in Lyra's eyes and he nodded. "Lead the way," he said. With their small team gathered, Lyra and Ethan guided them toward the first hidden passage. It was narrow and dark, a forgotten vent that led from the lower levels of the palace to the outer walls. The air was damp and the climb was difficult, but each step brought them closer to the promise of freedom. Chains still bound Lyra's wrists, but her mind was free, sharp, and alert. She knew exactly what to do, and she knew Ethan would be there to support her. As they moved through the passage, the group encountered their first challenge. A minor barrier, a simple grate, blocked their path. Ethan examined it carefully, noting the lock's design. "I can open this," he said softly. With careful precision, he used a small tool from his kit, loosening the mechanism without a sound. Lyra watched in admiration, realizing how human ingenuity complemented her own knowledge of the palace. Together they were unstoppable. Once the grate was open, they continued, emerging into a long corridor that overlooked the city's outer area. From there, the city walls were visible, towering, imposing, but not impossible. Lyra studied the walls, noting the guards' rotations below. "We must wait," she said. "The patrols will pass. Then we move quickly." They crouched in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. The tension was almost unbearable. Every sound, a footstep, a distant voice, a shifting shadow, seemed amplified. Sela clutched Lyra's arm nervously. Torrin gripped his staff tightly, ready for anything. Ethan remained calm, his focus absolute. Finally, the guards moved past, leaving the wall unobserved. Lyra led the team to the edge, pointing out handholds and footholds for climbing. "Carefully," she whispered. "One step at a time. Do not look down, do not rush." The climb was difficult, but their spirits lifted with every meter. Sela's fear slowly turned into exhilaration. Torrin's cautious nature gave way to determination, and Lyra, despite the chains, felt the thrill of possibility. Freedom was no longer a dream. At the top of the wall, they paused to catch their breath. The city sprawled below, the palace looming in the distance, and the sky stretched wide and open above them. Ethan looked at Lyra, a smile on his face. "You've done this before," he said quietly. "Your knowledge, your courage, and it's remarkable." Lyra shook her head slightly. "I've survived this place for years. But now, with you, it feels possible." They descended the other side of the wall carefully, landing on soft earth outside the palace grounds. The city's guards would notice their absence soon, but for now they had a small window of safety. The team moved quickly into the nearby forest, shadows blending with the trees, their hearts racing with the thrill of escape. As they ran, Lyra thought about what came next. The first step of freedom was always the hardest. They had escaped the palace walls, but their journey was far from over. The Overlord would pursue them, and the other captives still remained. But this small success had shown them that change was possible, that courage, intelligence, and cooperation could overcome fear and oppression. In the forest, they found a small clearing where they could rest. Ethan took out a small device, a human invention that allowed them to communicate quietly and monitor the palace from a distance. "We need to be ready," he said. "The Overlord will send patrols, but we can use this to stay ahead to plan our next moves." Lyra looked at her companions, seeing hope reflected in their eyes. "We will return," she said firmly. "Not just for ourselves, but for those still trapped. We will bring them freedom. And the palace will no longer control our lives." Sela nodded, her hands trembling with excitement. "I never thought I could feel hope," she admitted. "But now I feel it. And I want to help others feel it too." Torrin grunted in agreement. "Then we move together," he said. "We will not be slaves any longer." That night, as the moon rose above the forest, Lyra and Ethan sat together, planning their next steps. Their small team was growing stronger, more confident. Each success built courage. Each act of intelligence strengthened their bond. And each step brought them closer to the ultimate goal, Freedom, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had suffered under the Overlord's cruel rule. For Lyra, the chains that had bound her for so long felt lighter in her mind, even if they still clung to her wrists. With Ethan's help, with Sela and Toryn by her side, she could imagine a future where chains were not needed, where courage and hope were stronger than fear. And that vision, more than anything, kept her moving forward. Outside the forest, the city remained unaware of the small group that had slipped through its grasp. The Overlord's rule seemed as powerful as ever, but cracks had begun to form. Cracks that Lyra and her companions would widen with every careful, daring step. And in the quiet of the night, as the stars shone above, Lyra whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. Freedom is possible, and we will achieve it together." The forest was alive with whispers of freedom. Lyra, Ethan, Sela, and Toryn moved carefully among the trees, each step calculated to avoid detection. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, painting the ground in patches of silver. For the first time, Lyra felt a thrill that had nothing to do with fear, the thrill of hope, of possibility. But freedom was only the beginning. The Overlord's city still loomed in the distance, a place of oppression and fear. Lyra knew that escaping the palace walls was not enough. The other captives remained trapped, and the Overlord would soon realize that some had disappeared. If they wanted real change, they had to do more than survive. They had to organize, to plan, and to inspire. Ethan looked at the group. "We have a small advantage," he said quietly. "The palace does not know we are outside its walls yet. We can use this time to gather more allies and plan the next steps. If we act wisely, we can make a real difference." Lyra nodded, her chains still clinging to her wrists, reminding her of the past, but her mind was focused on the future. "We must move carefully," she said. "There are many others who fear the Overlord, but if we show them courage, if we give them hope, they will join us." The first task was to reach a nearby village where alien workers had secretly gathered when fleeing minor punishments. These workers had heard rumors of the human and the alien moving together, daring to resist the palace. Lyra and Ethan carefully approached the village, staying in the shadows. The villagers were wary at first, hesitant to trust strangers, especially one human. Lyra stepped forward, speaking in a calm, confident voice. "I am Lyra. You may have heard of the human who helps me. We have come to offer a choice, a chance to join us, to be free, to resist the Overlord." The villagers exchanged glances, uncertainty in their eyes. Then Sela stepped forward, speaking of the success of their escape. "I have seen what is possible," she said. "We can work together. We can be free if we act now." Toryn added, his voice strong and reassuring. "Fear has kept us silent too long. It is time to act. With courage and careful planning, we can change our lives." One by one, the villagers nodded. Some quietly followed, while others agreed to help with supplies and information. Within hours, the small group had grown from 4 to dozens. The sense of possibility was infectious. Even in the dark shadows of oppression, hope was spreading. Ethan and Lyra took time to plan carefully. They created simple signals, safe meeting points, and small strategies for rescuing more captives. Ethan introduced human technology, communication devices that allowed the group to coordinate without being detected, and simple tools that could disable small security systems temporarily. Lyra taught them how to move silently, hide in plain sight, and think like the guards. Together they formed a small but powerful resistance. Word spread quickly. Rumors of the human and the alien woman leading a quiet rebellion reached parts of the city. Guards became suspicious, patrols increased, and the Overlord grew uneasy. He did not yet know the full extent of the threat, but he could feel the cracks in his control. Fear had begun to take root among the oppressed, not fear of punishment, but fear of hope itself. Lyra and Ethan knew the risks. They moved with precision, carefully rescuing more captives and bringing them to safety in the forest. Each successful rescue strengthened the group's confidence, and each new member brought skills and knowledge that enhanced their efforts. Slowly, the small flame of rebellion was growing into a fire. One night, as the group gathered around a small fire in the forest, Ethan spoke to Lyra quietly. "We need a bigger plan. The Overlord will not wait. He will come for us. We have to strike strategically, not just rescue, but show that his power is not absolute." Lyra considered his words. "We can use what we know about the palace and its weaknesses, the predictable patterns of the guards. If we coordinate carefully, we can strike without unnecessary risk. We can free the captives inside, create confusion, and show that his control is breaking. They began rehearsing their strategy. Using small simulations, they mapped out the palace corridors, noting the weak points, guard rotations, and lightly monitored areas. Ethan trained small teams in human tactics, silent movement, coordinated signals, and clever diversions. Lyra instructed them in observation, stealth, and careful timing. Every person had a role, every action planned with precision. Finally, the night of the first major strike arrived. The group moved like shadows through the palace grounds, unseen and unheard. Lyra led them, chains on her wrists, but her mind sharp and fearless. Ethan guided them with quiet signals, using his knowledge of technology to avoid detection and create distractions where necessary. They reached the first target, a section of the palace where many captives were held. Lyra and her team moved silently, using hidden passages and lightly guarded doors. With careful precision, they unlocked the cells, freeing dozens of workers who had lived in fear for years. The captives looked at Lyra and Ethan in awe, hope shining in their eyes. "Follow us," Lyra whispered. "Freedom is possible. Stay quiet, stay calm, and trust us." As they led the captives through the palace, minor alarms began to sound. Guards were noticing something unusual. Ethan activated small devices that temporarily disrupted communication and security systems, buying the group precious time. Lyra's knowledge of the palace guided them through hidden passages, avoiding detection even as the tension rose. By the time they emerged into the outer corridors, the small group had grown significantly. Captives who had once been silent, terrified, and broken now moved with purpose, courage shining in their eyes. For the first time, Lyra saw the real power of hope. It was stronger than fear, stronger than chains, and stronger than the Overlord's cruelty. The Overlord, realizing his control was slipping, sent more guards to hunt the escapees. But by then, the group had already used careful diversions and misdirection to stay ahead. Lyra and Ethan had created a network of pathways that allowed them to move quickly and safely, turning the palace's own structure against it. In the forest outside, the group regrouped. They were tired but exhilarated. Dozens of captives had been freed, and the small rebellion had proven that the Overlord's power was not absolute. The fire of hope was spreading, and the oppressed were beginning to believe in their own strength. Ethan looked at Lyra, pride in his eyes. "You've done this," he said. "Your knowledge, courage, and leadership, you've inspired them all." Lyra shook her head. "No, we did this together, humans and aliens working as one. That is the strength the Overlord could never understand." Sela and Torin joined them, smiling. "We have seen what is possible," Sela said. "And now we will continue. We will not stop until everyone is free," Torin nodded. "The palace may be strong, but it cannot withstand courage, intelligence, and hope." The night air was filled with a sense of victory, but Lyra knew the work was not finished. The Overlord would strike back, his guards would be relentless, and danger would always be near. But now they had a chance, like a real chance. With Ethan's guidance, her leadership, and the growing number of allies, they could challenge tyranny and create a future where chains no longer ruled lives. As the group settled for the night, Lyra looked up at the stars. The chains on her wrists were still there, a reminder of the past, but they felt lighter in her mind. She had a plan, allies, and a human who believed in her vision. Hope was no longer fragile. It was a force that could grow, inspire, and ultimately triumph. The turning point had come. The first victories had been achieved, and as the wind rustled through the forest, carrying whispers of freedom and courage, Lyra knew that the real fight was only beginning. A fight that would test intelligence, bravery, and unity, but one that could ultimately bring a new dawn for everyone who had suffered under the Overlord's rule. The sun rose over the horizon, casting warm golden light across the liberated city. The oppressive shadows of the Overlord's palace no longer loomed as they once had. Smoke from fires set by the last resistance strikes had long faded, and the city's streets were filled with cautious, hopeful activity. Lyra stood atop a small hill just outside the city, her chains long gone, sunlight glinting in her golden eyes. The weight that had burdened her for so many years was finally lifted, replaced by a responsibility she was ready to bear: rebuilding her world. Beside her, Ethan surveyed the city with a quiet satisfaction. Humans were not native to this planet. Yet he had discovered a strength within himself that he never fully appreciated before. The bravery, intelligence, and courage of Lyra had inspired him, just as his knowledge and courage had aided her. They were a team bound not by chains but by respect, trust, and shared vision. Behind them, the group they had rescued, Sela, Torrin, and the others who had joined their cause, were helping citizens clean streets, rebuild buildings, and share stories of hope. It was a slow process. The city had been under oppression for decades, and fear lingered in the hearts of many. But Lyra's leadership combined with Ethan's guidance was already sowing the seeds of change. Lyra turned to Ethan, her expression serious but calm. "We have done what many thought impossible, but rebuilding is harder than escaping. People need hope, guidance, and structure. They need to feel safe again," Ethan nodded. "And they will. You've shown them courage, intelligence, and kindness. That's more powerful than any chains, more powerful than any ruler." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to reflect on what they had accomplished. The Overlord's tyranny, which had seemed unbreakable, had fallen not through brute force alone but through strategy, courage, and unity. They had avoided unnecessary violence wherever possible, using clever tactics, distraction, and intelligence to outmaneuver a stronger opponent. Lyra realized something important. Freedom was not only about breaking physical chains, it was about inspiring the spirit, teaching others to trust their own courage. The city's citizens began gathering in the central square, curiosity mixing with cautious optimism. Lyra addressed them from a raised platform, her voice steady and strong. "We have faced fear, oppression, and chains," she said. "But today we are free. Not because one of us is stronger, but because we worked together, trusted each other, and dared to hope. This city belongs to all of us now, and it is up to us to make it a place of fairness, courage, and unity." Her words were met with applause, cheers, and tears. Even those who had been silent for years found the courage to speak, to share their experiences, and to help rebuild. Lyra smiled quietly, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from chains and darkness to sunlight and hope. Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did this," he said simply. "You led the way." "I only helped," Lyra shook her head. "No, we did this together. Humans, aliens, all of us. Everyone played a part, but yes, your courage and intelligence helped, and I am grateful for that." Over the following weeks, the city transformed. The citizens rebuilt homes, repaired streets, and established systems of fairness and cooperation. Lyra worked closely with both aliens and humans, sharing knowledge, teaching strategies for safety, and encouraging the spread of education. The oppressive hierarchy of the past was replaced with councils where decisions were made collectively. Fear slowly gave way to hope, and chains were replaced by opportunity. Yet challenges remained. Some loyalists to the former overlord tried to sabotage progress, spreading lies and fear. But the city's residents, inspired by Lyra and the small team of allies she had guided, stood firm. They did not fight with anger or violence, but with intelligence, courage, and unity. Every act of kindness, every shared plan, every person who found their voice strengthened the new society. One afternoon, Lyra and Ethan walked through the central square, watching children play and citizens discuss rebuilding projects. The air was filled with laughter, a sound that had been rare under the Overlord's rule. Lyra's heart swelled with pride and relief. "I never imagined it could feel like this," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "You imagined it, and now it is real. That's the difference. Why, the human spirit can only do so much alone. But when combined with courage, intelligence, and determination, anything is possible," Lyra nodded. "And now we must think beyond this city. There are other places still under oppression, other lives that need hope. Freedom is not just for one city. It is for all who are willing to fight for it." Ethan considered her words. "Then we continue. We travel, we help, we inspire. We show that courage and cooperation are stronger than fear and tyranny." Lyra's eyes shone. "Yes, but first let us ensure this city thrives. Let us prove that freedom works, that kindness, intelligence, and courage are stronger than oppression." That evening, the city gathered for a celebration. Fires lit the streets, music filled the air, and stories of courage were shared. Lyra watched as Sela and Torrin helped younger citizens understand the importance of strategy, intelligence, and teamwork. Ethan guided groups in creating tools and systems that would make the city safer and more organized. Together, they created not only freedom but a new way of living. Amid the celebration, Lyra found a quiet moment to herself. She looked at the stars, remembering the nights she had spent chained and afraid. She remembered the loneliness, the fear, and the longing for a world beyond oppression. And now she realized she had a life she never dared imagine, one full of hope, purpose, and friendship. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Ethan stood beside her, looking at the city below. "It's beautiful," he said simply. Lyra smiled. "Yes, and it is just the beginning. One city can show the way. One city can inspire others," Ethan nodded. "And humans will be there to help. We can learn from each other. Together, we can build a better future." For the first time, Lyra felt complete freedom, not just from chains, but from fear, doubt, and despair. She had found a companion, allies, and a purpose greater than herself. And most importantly, she had discovered that courage, intelligence, and kindness were powerful forces, capable of changing the world. The night grew deep, and the city rested under the stars. Fires burned gently, laughter echoed, and the spirit of hope filled the streets. Lyra and Ethan walked hand in hand through the city they had helped transform, hearts light with joy and determination. Lyra looked at him and said, "We have done something incredible, but the work is never finished. There will always be challenges, always be obstacles, but now we know we can overcome them, together." Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "Yes, and wherever we go next, we take hope with us. That is what makes humans and aliens stronger. Our courage, our intelligence, and our willingness to help each other." The dawn of a new era had arrived. Chains were broken, oppression had fallen, and the city thrived under the guidance of those who believed in freedom, hope, and cooperation. Lyra's life had changed completely, transformed from one of suffering into one of purpose, leadership, and possibility. And all it had taken was a spark, the spark of a human who had seen her potential, believed in her courage, and helped her discover her own strength. The stars above shone brightly, reflecting on the city below. And in that light, Lyra whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning. A new dawn has arrived, and we will continue to rise stronger together wherever freedom is needed." With that promise in her heart, Lyra and Ethan turned back toward the city, ready to face the future. Together they would guide their people, inspire courage, and prove that hope and unity could overcome even the darkest oppression. And so, under the first light of a new day, a world once chained and afraid stepped into the promise of freedom, leadership, and the power of the human and alien spirit, united.